Senator Bradley holds a BA degree in American history from Princeton University, an MA degree from Oxford University, where he was a Rhodes Scholar. He has authored 6 books on American politics, culture, and the economy. Senator Bradley will talk with us about how he believes America is at a teachable moment when we are compelled to reevaluate our political system, our leadership, and our agenda as a nation, and ourselves as citizens as well. Ladies and gentlemen, Senator Bill Bradley.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you very much, John, for that very kind introduction. You were one of my good supporters in 2000. I can't thank you enough. If you put yourself on the line, you never forget people like John. So thank you very much. Allison, thank you for your very kind words about my service in politics. It kind of makes it all worthwhile when someone of her quality stands up and says that she recognizes some commonality in values. And I want to thank the university for inviting me, Book Passage for facilitating this connection, and I'm pleased to be here tonight and see so many of you here for this event. Maybe I'll begin by telling you a story about when I used to make my living running around in short pants in drafty arenas, since that's something John highlighted. Then I want to go on and talk about the book. But I was with the New York Knicks in about my 3rd or 4th year. And we played the Boston Celtics back-to-back Saturday night and Sunday afternoon. And we lost both games. And the following week, I got a call from a fan. I got a letter from a fan. And the letter said, Bradley, if you lose one more game to the Boston Celtics, I'm going to come to your house and kill your dog. And the guy signed his name. Joe Pell. Well, maybe because he signed his name, I don't know. I wrote back to him and I said, Dear Joe Pell, look, we don't like to lose any more than you do. We're doing the best we can. By the way, I don't own a dog. Well, you can guess what happened. About 3 weeks later, a UPS truck pulled up in front of our house. And I got out of the UPS truck. He was carrying a big box, put it down on the front steps. And my wife looks out there and comes to me and says, Bill, what is this box out there with a dog in it? And I look outside, and sure enough, there's a box, and inside the box is a dog. On the outside of the box is an envelope. On the outside of the envelope, it says, From Joe Pell. And I open the envelope, and there's a note inside, and the note says, Bradley, don't get too attached to this dog. I always thought that was pretty good advice for a politician. Don't get too attached to your job, because you never can tell when other people might have a different idea. Well, let's see. Let me move right into it, the New American Story. I left politics essentially after the presidential run, 2001. I'm no longer a U.S. Senator. I'm no longer a presidential candidate. I'm not even a practicing politician. But I am a senator. But I am a citizen. And as a citizen, I think I have some responsibilities. And it is true that for 20 years of my life, I thought about policy and politics 24 hours a day. Over the last 5 or 6 years, I've seen the way the world has moved. And I felt that this book was my citizenship responsibility to write and to share and to talk about. That's why I'm here tonight. That's why I wrote the book. And I hope that you will read the book, obviously. And I hope that you'll find it challenging to your role as a citizen as well. The book is called The New American Story because I think we've been in the grip of an old story that we need to escape. And the old story is a story about fear, about lack of compassion, about America-only policies abroad. It's a story about a belief in unlimited individual possibilities, but severely limited collective possibilities. It is a can't-do story, as in we can't make Social Security solvent for the long term. We can't make sure everybody in America has health insurance. We can't break our addiction to oil. We can't assure comfortable pensions for Americans. We can't really make our public school system be the best in the world once again. It is a can't-do story, and it is fundamentally untrue. It is not who we have been. It is not who we are. We are a can-do society, and I think we need something other than a can't-do leadership. So if that is the old story, what is the new American story? Well, the new American story essentially says put country ahead of party, and tell people the truth about what our real circumstances are, and then offer them specific answers to the problems that you describe in telling people the truth. What I wanted, the premise there is that when people hear the truth and they hear a real answer, that they'll actually respond. So what I'd like to do is to take a couple issues, tell you what the old story says and what the new story says, and then move from there. Let's take the truth about savings in this country. We have inadequate savings. The reason savings are important is because investment comes from savings. If you don't have savings, you can't have investment. Investment generates growth. Growth generates good jobs and prosperity for all. Yet in this country, we consume 71% of our GDP, and we save 1% of our GDP. Meanwhile, in China, they consume 38% of their GDP, and they save 35% of their GDP. So how do we have all the malls that are still flourishing in America if we don't save any money? The answer is we borrow it. Home equity loans are at an all-time high as a percent of GDP. In fact, the home equity loan has replaced the company raise for millions of Americans in the last decade. And if you look at overall debt, our debt is, we're the largest debtor country in the world. Why is that? Because we borrow money every day from other countries. China we borrow, Japan we borrow. It's about $3 billion a day that we borrow in order to be able to continue to consume. The only way that we're going to break that dependence is if we increase national savings. The fastest way to increase national savings is through reducing the budget deficit. In order to reduce the budget deficit, you'll have to cut spending and you'll have to increase taxes in the context of overall tax reform, which would be lower rates and fewer loopholes. That is the truth, and that is what the new story says we have to do. The old story says, what problem? What problem? There is no problem. The deficit's gone up $1 trillion in the last several years. No problem. We're still consuming well. Let's just continue to give tax cuts. On the issue of, let's say, oil, the truth is that we've fought 2 wars in the last 15 years, in part related to oil. And the old story says, what problem? We'll just drill for more oil. We can find it anywhere. We'll find it. We always have. We'll find more. No problem. The new story says, no, wait a minute. We have fought 2 wars, in part because of oil, in the last 15 years. And there is something we can do about it. And that's the truth with all of these issues, that once you face the truth, there are answers. And what do we do about it? Well, if we had the same mileage standard as Europe has, we would import no oil from OPEC. 45 miles a gallon as opposed to 25 miles a gallon, 5 million barrels less, we would import no oil from OPEC, right? One piece of legislation. In order to facilitate that transition, why don't we do something I call a fee bait? If you're driving one of these SUVs or a Hummer, you pay a big fee. All the revenue from that goes to subsidize, in the form of rebate, purchases of more fuel-efficient cars. And if we really wanted to go another step, let's put a $1 gasoline tax on. Why? Not because I want a $1 gasoline tax on, but because I want to cut taxes on work. What are they? Social Security, Medicare, unemployment. So if we took a $1 gasoline tax and took all the revenue from that $1 gasoline tax and reduced work taxes, Social Security, unemployment, or Medicare taxes, what would the country be like in 5 years? In 5 years, we'd have 45 mile a gallon cars, right? And therefore, individuals would be paying no more for the gasoline. They'd be paying a higher price for the gasoline, but the gasoline would go further because we'd have 45 mile a gallon cars. And at the same time, people would have lower Social Security, unemployment, or Medicare taxes. And what would that mean for companies? Since 15% of all expenses for a company go to these labor taxes, they would hire more people because it would be cheaper to hire more people. So that's the old story, which says, what problem? Drill for more oil. The new story says, we can break this addiction. Just these 3 short things, and in the long run, be better off. What does another issue? Let's take again, we talked about pensions, or we talked about savings. Now let's talk about pensions. Let's talk about Social Security first. The old story says, oh my God, let me run away. I don't want to talk about Social Security. I'm going to lose my election. I'm going to talk about Social Security. So nobody talks about what we can do to make Social Security solvent for the long run. The old story says, well, what we should do is we should privatize part of Social Security. That's what we should do, and the market take care of it. Well, no one, not even the president, has presumed to say that would make Social Security solvent for 75 years. What would make Social Security solvent for 75 years? 4 simple things. All new state and local workers have to be a part of Social Security. They're not now. The consumer price calculation would have to reflect reality. If you have higher cost, you go to lower price goods. And 2% of the 6.2% Social Security tax should be applied to all income, not simply $94,000. And then we make retirement age 70 in 2099. If we did those 4 things, Social Security is solvent for 75 years. No problem. This is solvable. It is not rocket science. But people want a comfortable retirement, not just Social Security. The Federal Reserve says that if you're between 55 and 65, you should have about $314,000 in the bank or in your pension account, savings. What's the average? $60,000. What does that mean? A lot of people aren't going to have a comfortable retirement. If you don't save, and your company doesn't save, and the country doesn't save, you're not going to have a comfortable retirement. And so what that means is that we're not going to be able to help people that are approaching retirement today if they haven't saved and their company hasn't saved for them. But we can at least address the problem longer term. What do I suggest? Every child that's born in America should have a birthright account of $5,000. That would be invested, compounding at 6% annually, so I just take that yield. Ends up over $300,000 when that individual reaches 70 years of age. So we then have Social Security plus. There are answers to these problems. Take health care. The old story says we need medical savings accounts and higher prices so people consume less. The new story says that doesn't answer one of the fundamental problems with our healthcare system today, and that is the equivalent of a 747 crashing every day in America, or the number of people who die in hospitals every year. And nothing is done about it. Nothing is done about it. All of you probably have a family member, you put them in a hospital, you don't know what's going to happen. I've had 4 or 4 friends that died because of infections they got in hospitals. And yet, we do nothing about it, and a tax savings account isn't going to solve the problem. We have the best health care in the world. All of us who can afford it can testify to that. We do not have the best health care system. 47 million people in America still don't have any health insurance. Now, what is that, 47 million? That's kind of an abstract number, but think of it this way. It's more than all the people living in the following states of the United States combined: Minnesota, Iowa, Missouri, Arkansas, Louisiana, Oklahoma, Kansas, Nebraska, South Dakota, North Dakota, Montana, Wyoming, New Mexico. Now, if none of the people living in those states had health insurance, would we tolerate that as a nation? Absolutely not. But they're not all living in one place. They're spread out among all of us. I mean, we know who they are: the cab drivers, the waiters, the waitresses, the people who sit with our children, the people who sit with our elderly parents as we go on our work or our vacations. And they have no health insurance. We are 17th in the world in infant mortality, and we are 40th in the world in life expectancy. One of these incredible facts that most people don't focus on. There are answers. Everybody can be covered in America. You can either take the 47 million people that don't have health insurance based on their income and give them subsidies that will allow them to buy in the current health care marketplace, or you can go to a single-payer system and have the government take all that load off the back of business. And as a result, you would end up with a much better healthcare system, either one of those routes, plus dealing with medical errors. And the way you deal with medical errors is you've got to get them reported, right? What's the incentive in the healthcare system to say, yes, I gave the wrong dosage, nurse A says, or yes, I made a mistake in the operation, Dr. Y says. There's no incentive because they're going to get sued. So people try to hide the errors. I'm saying bring the errors out into the open, report them immediately, and correct them within a month, and you get some safe harbor from plaintiff lawsuits. And doctors can once again practice medicine. The last, education. Well, very simple. What's the old story say about education? We want vouchers and local standards. Let every school district, let every state set whatever the standards are. In a globalized world, local standards make no sense. If we're trying to produce a generation of people who will be able to compete in a world economy because they're smart, you got to be able to compare the schools in Oregon with the schools in Georgia. Which ones are doing better? If you have state standards, you can't do that. So you need national standards. And then, quite frankly, we need to pay teachers what they deserve to make, as long as they agree to differential pay and being paid based on accountability. For example, in 1970, if you were a beginning teacher in the New York City school system, and you had a brother or a sister who was a beginning lawyer in a prestigious New York law firm, do you know how much more your brother or sister in the law firm made than you did when you were a first-year teacher? $2,000. Do you know what that is today? $103,000. So what are people doing? They're not dumb. They're going to go into law and not into teaching. So you have to dramatically increase teacher salaries, up to doubling those salaries, in order to get the talent into the system. But you don't just give it to the union and say, here, do what you want. We'll give you more money. You hold people accountable. And you hold them accountable for results. There are a lot of other things you can do in education, but those are the ones. So there is an old story and a new story on all these things. It should illustrate to you that in the new story, it is clear there are answers to these problems. That brings us to the last thing, which is our political process itself. We're 139th in the world in terms of voter participation. Italy's number one. 92% of the eligible voters in Italy vote. We're a little under 50%. When you ask the 50% that don't vote in America, why don't you vote? The number one reason they give, there are other reasons, politicians don't speak to my real needs, I don't trust the process, blah, blah. But the number one reason is, I got to work. I got to work. I got 2 jobs. So let me ask all of you a question. I want you to raise your hands. How many of you know why we vote on Tuesday? My guess is 99.9% of Americans don't know why we vote on Tuesday. The answer is that decision was made in 1845 when we were in the horse and buggy era. And before that, elections were on different days. The government says we ought to have one day when we have an actual election, not a couple, tabulated over several days. Can't do it on Saturday, Sabbath. Can't do it on Sunday, Sabbath. Takes a day to travel, because you got a horse and buggy, to the polls. Can't do it on Monday. Wednesday's a market day, so we got Tuesday. That is why Tuesday. Well, we're now living in a different era. I don't see many horse and buggies out here. Families, 2 members of the family sometimes work 3, 4 jobs. So what is the answer to this? Again, very simple. Move the election from Tuesday to 2 days on the weekend. Highly controversial? I don't think so. Common sense? Yes, common sense. Move it to the weekend, 2 days. No conflict with work. And you then have families able to take their children to the polls and inculcate in them early the primary sacred duty of a citizen, which is to vote. There are other things we need to do in our politics. We need public financing of elections to break the bond between lobbying and the office holder. We can do that for about $2 billion a year, which is just about what we spend promoting democracy abroad out of a $2.6 trillion budget. I don't think $2 billion is too much to try to clean up elections in America. And then the last thing we need to do is change the way we district. We draw the lines for congressional districts. Now they are done by partisan state legislatures. All the Republican legislators try to maximize the congressional seats for Republicans. Democratic legislators try to maximize the districts for Democrats. The result, out of 435 members of Congress, there are 40 seats that are competitive. In 2006, Democrats won more of them, so Nancy Pelosi is the Speaker of the House. Which I don't think is a bad thing, actually. I like that idea. But the reality is 395 of those districts are now competitive. Many of them are 60-40, one side or the other side, safe districts. So if I'm in a congressman in a 60-40 district, I don't care what the Republicans say. I'm not worried about winning. I got 60-40 Democratic registration. I'm going to win no matter what. What I got to worry about is a primary challenge in the Republican Party on the right, the Democratic Party on the left. And so I go to Congress and I play to the extremes so I can get reelected and avoid a primary challenge. The result is a lot of issues that are important to some people, stem cell research, gay rights, abortion, gun control, make your list. The process focuses on, and the process does not focus on what most people care about. Jobs, good job, good pay, health care, pensions, education, breaking the addiction to oil. So have commissions set these. Not partisan state legislatures. Have commissions and have a 3-judge panel make a approval of the districts. So all this begins by telling the truth. And what underlies this, and I'm going to close with questions pretty soon, very soon. What underlies this is something I call an ethic of connectedness. When you see that NASA picture of the world, from space. When you see that picture, this blue pearl out there in the darkness, it's pretty easy to understand that there's one atmosphere, and we're all connected. Indeed, you see smog in Los Angeles, part of it comes from China. But when it comes to education, healthcare, tax policy, what you find is a battle between 2 competing ethics. One of them is I call the ethic of caring, collective action, Democrats, and the other is the ethic of responsibility, individual action, Republicans. And that's what our politics is, rat-a-tat-tat, ethic of caring versus ethic of responsibility. I'm right, no, I'm right. No, you're right, no, I'm right. What we need to confront our issues, our problems in this country, and the only way we're going to solve them is both. You need collective action and individual responsibility. You need universal health insurance, but if people don't take care of their own bodies, or I should say, if they do take care of their bodies, and about 50% of costs are related to self-destructive behavior, then it's going to cost all of us less to insure everybody. If you save, it'll help everybody. If you study hard, we'll have more economic growth. It is collective action and individual responsibility. Now, let me mention this idea of telling the truth. Flight 93. Remember, on September 11th, there were 4 planes, 2 hit the World Trade Center, 1 the Pentagon, and the 3rd crashed in a field in Pennsylvania. The 4th plane was actually taken over by terrorists after the World Trade Center and the Pentagon. And when the terrorists took the plane, when the terrorists took over the plane, people got on a cell phone. And they discovered there had been 2 planes that hit the World Trade Center, 1 hit the Pentagon, and they realized they were the 4th plane. They were headed to Washington, probably to hit the Capitol or the White House. And they didn't want that to happen. What did they do? They had a little town meeting on the plane. And they decided our one chance of saving ourselves is to rush the cockpit. At best, we save ourselves. At worst, the plane does not hit the Congress or the White House. That's what they did. Tragically, they lost their lives, but they did prevent the plane from hitting the Capitol. What's the point of that story? That the people on Flight 93 faced their truth. They faced their truth, and they took action based on that truth. What does the New American Story ask? It doesn't ask you to give your life. It simply says, study harder, take care of your body, pay a little more in taxes, think of yourself as a world citizen, not a local citizen. Make decisions that only a citizen can make about the whole, not about your own personal interest or your own group's interest, but about the whole. That's what the American Story asks. It says, essentially, we can do these things. The people are in control, not the elected officials or the lobbyists. One last thing, and then I'll do some questions. I have as John said, I have a show on Sirius satellite radio called American Voices. And what I do is I interview people all over the country. And one of the interviews is always with somebody who's doing something very special in the community. For example, I interviewed a guy 2 weeks ago who shined shoes at the Pittsburgh Children's Hospital for 48 years. And out of every tip he got, he put a portion of it into a fund to pay the cost of children who couldn't afford to pay their health bills. And over that time, he's put away about $150,000. What an extraordinary human being. Another story. A woman outside Chicago, great Chicago accent. Of course, that's important in radio. Great Chicago accent. She had a son who had cancer, 11 years old. In the hospital, got a lot of letters. Came home, got no letters. And the son asked his mother one day, are people not sending me letters because they know I'm going to die? And so his mother starts sending him letters. A good week you get 3. A good week you get 1. A bad week you get 3 or 4. And she signed all the letters, a secret pal. One night she came into the kitchen and he was writing on his table. She said, well, what are you doing? No, it's not for you. She writes, folds it up, gives it to him, and says, would you give this my secret pal? She starts to open it. No, not you, Mom. My secret pal. So she puts him to bed, comes back. What will you do? Okay. Opens the note, and there is a note saying, I love you, Mom. A couple of weeks later, he dies. And she goes into his closet, and she finds in his closet, in a shoebox, and this was a messy kid, all of the letters from his secret pal organized chronologically. And in the bottom of the shoebox, she finds an address book. And in the address book, it is the addresses of all the kids who attended the Kids with Cancer camp the previous summer. So as a tribute to her son, she writes each one of those kids a letter, bucking them up as she bucked up her son. And pretty soon she gets other letters coming in. Well, you wrote to my son, how about his friend? Or you wrote to this child, I know a child in another state that has cancer. Can you write? So she starts an organization called Love Letters, and over a decade she writes over 3,000 letters to kids with cancer. Now that is what, in my presidential campaign, I would have called, and still call today, the goodness of the American people. And you know what? It's not simply local. It can be national. Our government can reflect the goodness of the American people as well as the lady outside Chicago or the shoeshine guy in Pittsburgh, if we take control of this country ourselves. Being a citizen is not easy when you take it seriously. But when you take it seriously, great things can happen. Thank you very much.